This is cultural psychology. This is the first chapter. We're going to talk about what the requirements are for the class. Um, or- and we're going to talk about the first chapter, I guess. Okay. This is Psych 350, Section 38, Fall 2021. This is me. I'm Bruce Bradway. I live in Lost Nation, Iowa. That's where my office is right now until 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 and if they uh, try to get me to move back. We'll see how that goes. There's three ways to communicate with me. The first one I would try if I were you would be office hours. Uh, this office hours are Monday and Wednesday 3 to 5 and Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 10. If that doesn't fit your schedule, you can email me and I will try to communicate with you on your schedule. That works fine. This is the Zoom meeting number. And I'm going to use that for all of my office hours. So you should be able to click on this, not really click on this. If you cut and paste, I guess, it should take you to the meeting. Do you have to communicate with me like this? No, you don't have to. I understand that Zoom isn't always that easy, and some people don't really like looking at the tops of people's heads or whatever. uh, the other Another way that you can get a hold of me is by email. That's a preferred way as well. A lot of people would rather communicate this way. That's fine. I will try to answer your email. I read my email a couple times a day usually. I didn't read it yesterday for some reason, but I will try to read it every day. If nothing else works, then you can call me on the phone. And this is my cell phone number. Um, I'm not as in love with my cell phone as a lot of people are. I leave it sometimes. I forget it. The battery runs to zero sometimes, but I'll try. I will always answer the phone if I'm anywhere close to it. I go outside from time to time, and I don't usually take my phone. It's a little bit heavy to be carting around all over the place, and I'm afraid I'm going to sit down on it and break the screen or something. Anyway, I, I'm 72 years old, so telephones. When you say telephone to me, I think of something stuck to the wall by a wire that's stuck to a pole out in the wire is anyway, and you communicate using this wire. But I can use well, obviously, I'm creating a YouTube video right now, so it's not that I'm technologically backward. It's just that I don't have the same um, technological culture that you guys do, that a lot of you have. Some people would not be caught dead without their cell phone, and I forget it from time to time. I forget a lot, actually. My wife does too. Sometimes I'll call her on the phone and I'll hear her phone ringing, in front of her computer or something, and she's gone somewhere. She's forgotten her phone. That's okay. Okay, so what do you have to do in order to pass this class? Let's go down here. Assessment. There will be a test after Chapter 4, Chapter 8, and Chapter 14. Each test will be worth 75 points for a total of 225 points. That's the lion's share of the points for the class are these three tests. But I also want you to write a paper comparing the Dene culture to another culture. When I talk about another culture, I'm primarily talking about another country's culture, another tribe's culture, one that's not quite the same. As a matter of fact, I have never run into anybody. I've lived all over the world and all over the United States, and I've never seen any other culture that is similar to the Dene culture, which is kind of curious. I haven't been everywhere, and I haven't met everyone, of course. But the Dene culture is fairly unique as far as I have experienced. So that's what I'd like you to do. I think you don't really understand your culture until you start comparing it to another culture. And that's the best way of understanding who you are and why you act the way that you act, is if you can compare yourself with somebody else, somebody that's not the same as you are. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to find a book or see, I'm an English major. I'm an English literature major. That's my undergraduate degrees in English. So reading is really important to me. If I look at the books I read this summer, let me count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 19 books this summer so far, and I'm working on one right now. Anyway, so I read a lot, and I think it's important for you to think about other people's cultures, not just your own. I know that Dene College does focus on your culture, and I think that's really positive. But in order to be a good counselor, you need to understand where the person is coming from, and that means understanding their culture and understanding the differences. You certainly wouldn't want to start counseling somebody who's not Dene and try to make them into a Navajo. That just wouldn't be, for one thing, you wouldn't want that. And for another thing, it wouldn't work. Because everyone wants to be their own person, and everyone grows up with their own culture. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Let me get rid of this thing. There we go. The other thing that I want you to do is to answer the discussion questions. I talk about the theme of each chapter. And normally my discussion questions have to do with you exploring your own culture or exploring somebody else's culture or interacting with another culture. And of course, there's 14 chapters, and each one is worth 10 points. So that's 140 points for a total of 465 points. I have a stack of books I'm looking at right now that of books that represent other cultures. If you have a problem deciding about what culture you want to talk about, or finding a book, I can help you find a book. All you need to do is communicate with me. I have a lot of, well, I read 19 books this summer. So I read a lot. I have some pretty good books. I've been accumulating these things for the last 4 or 5 years. These books, I mean, and I can help you find a book that represents the culture you're talking about. Korean culture, Japanese culture, um, Mongolian culture, cowboy culture is different from your culture, certainly. Even though you have uh, members of the tribe that are cowboys, or at least they act like cowboys or whatever. They rodeo. Um, you even have a rodeo team. But the reality is that the cowboy culture is completely alien to what's happening now. So I can find you a book. I'll help you find a book. I have a really good one about Mongolia. I was surprised when I found it. Normally, read a novel about something, but this was a nonfiction book, and it's pretty good. Okay, anyway, that's what you need to do in order to pass the class. You need to accumulate 465 points, and that will give you an A, or between 418 points and 465 points. The other thing we need to talk about is late work. I understand. I understand. You know, stuff happens. I accept all late work. So if you fall behind or something happens or you know your child is sick, just to take care of the kid. You need to make sure that your life is as centered as possible. So I accept late work. I hate to get everything at the end of the semester, but sometimes that happens. I don't have that many students this year. I don't think. I have 41, I think. Right now I have 41, which isn't too bad. I mean, one semester, 17 people were trying to finish their thesis. This semester, there's only 5 people that are writing theses, so that's a real positive. Okay, so let's get your stuff in whenever you can. Try to be on time if possible. If not possible, then don't worry about it. I do accept all late work. You have to have everything in by the end of the semester because if you don't, I can't count it. So there you go. Let me get rid of this thing. Okay, so let's talk about the chapter 1. Remember where I am. There we go. Okay, chapter 1. What is cultural psychology? Love this class. Oh, I didn't tell you what the book is. The book is by Heine. It's gone now. The book is by Heine. It's a really good book. The individual that wrote the book is from British Columbia, which is in Canada, of course. And he went to Japan when he was young, and he married a Japanese woman. So there's a lot of comparisons between Japan and North America. It's interesting when he when he wants to say something negative about the United States, he just says it. And a lot of times, and he doesn't say anything negative about Canada. That's really kind of curious. Yeah, he's not real nice to the United States. A lot of times he'll talk about North America instead of United States or Canada. So it's really kind of interesting, kind of an interesting textbook. So and he talks about the Japanese culture a lot because he knows about the Japanese culture. He lives in the Japanese culture, or at least his wife is from Japan, and I imagine it's an amalgamation of the two cultures, Western culture and Eastern culture. Anyway, so we're going to talk about what is cultural psychology. People from different cultures live their lives differently. They speak different languages. People have different customs. They wear different clothes. They eat different foods, as you can see. I've lived in Japan. They eat a lot of seafood there. And the reason they eat so much seafood and they don't eat beef or pork is because Japan is a volcanic island. And there's not a lot of room for them to live on. About 70% of it is uninhabitable. 70% of the Japanese islands are uninhabitable. So they have to live near the seashore, and there's not a lot of room to graze cattle or to raise pigs or to raise chickens. So the Japanese eat a lot of seafood. So if you go to Japan, you eat seaweed and rice. They grow rice as their staple food. But there's an awful, and they'll eat a lot of things coming out of the ocean. When I was there, I remember what they have: dried squid, dried octopus, and this was their snack food. It was like beef jerky, all these dried fishes that they were eating. Anyway, everybody eats different food. Some people eat more vegetables. Some people eat a lot of meat. In the United States, we eat a lot of red meat for one reason or another, but of course, we have a lot of land to graze cattle on. and livestock. And of course, you guys eat a lot of mutton. And there you go. What are we talking about? Have they different cultures have different religious beliefs, and this is Hindu, this is Buddhism, this one is Jewish religion, this is a Christian religion. I'm not sure what that one is. Anyway, probably I don't see the Muslim religion. Different child rearing practices. This is something people like to argue about. Much about a person's lifestyle can be predicted by just by knowing his or her culture. Psychological processes are shaped by experience. And this is something that as a potential counselor or even as a psychologist, not or as a psychologist, you need to remember that we've all lived different experiences. You know, there's no reason why I should act like, you know, somebody in, say, Lee, because I've been all over the world and I've experienced a lot of different things. I've been shot at by a lot of different people, and that has created the person that I am. I grew up on a farm in Indiana. You know, that formed who I am. One of the things that I seem to think about a lot are tractors, as strange as that may seem. Growing up on a farm, of course, we had this tractor and that tractor. What did we have? We had a Farmall and a Minneapolis Moline and a Case and a Ford. And if you wanted to plow the field, you couldn't use the Ford. It was too weak. But if you wanted to hoe the beans, then you used the Ford. You know, it's weird because I didn't really spend that much time sitting on a tractor. We didn't farm. It was my neighbor that farmed, that was doing all the farming, but we worked for him from time to time, baled a lot of hay. But I seem to be obsessed with old tractors for some reason. I'm just fascinated by them. So that has shaped my experience. You know, if you grow up in the city, what do you know about tractors or care about tractors? And the answer is nothing. So you know, it's really kind of interesting. Your experiences will form the way that you think. I went to college. I have 5 degrees. I mean, it's kind of silly to have that much education. And of my 5 degrees, they're in 4 different areas. I have two degrees in psychology, 1 in political science, 1 in medical laboratory technology, and 1 in English. You know, people usually don't do this, and these are my experiences. Okay, something made noise. To what extent should ways of thinking look similar around the world because people share a universal brain? To what extent should people around the world look different because they have divergent experiences? And a good example is this is a horse and a Great Dane. As you can see, they're the same color and they're the same height. It's a miniature horse and a Great Dane. Culture is any kind of information that is acquired from other members of one's species through social learning that is capable of affecting an individual's behavior, any kind of idea, any kind of belief, any kind of technology, any kind of habit, any kind of practice. And of course, this is Psy doing his horse dance, or whatever it is. Gangnam Style. And there he is again. The Korean culture is similar to the American culture. I've never seen anybody, well, I have seen somebody do this in the United States. But the reality is, you know, he created this dance himself. He's a Korean ambassador now because this was such a popular, it's no longer the most popular video on YouTube. I can't remember what is, but for the longest time it was the most popular video, and a lot of it has to do with the Korean culture. It was interesting, you know, everybody thought Gangnam Style was a great song back in whenever it came out, but his follow-up song was embarrassing. It was about being rude, which the people in Korea just thought it was a hoot. But of course, people in the United States are seeing him. What did he do? One of the things he did was a lady came in to eat dinner with him, and he grabbed her chair and pulled it out from under, and she slammed on the ground, and that was part of the song. Anyway, and in Korea they thought it was just the funniest thing they'd ever seen, but in the United States not so much. You can look at it if you want. Culture indicates a particular group of individuals. Cultures are people who are existing within some kind of shared context. And of course, this is Psy with his dancing girls. And there's guys back here. I've only seen the girls. I've only that shows you where my mind is. I didn't even see the guys back there. Okay, so this is Psy dancing with all of these individuals. They're all Korean, and you can tell they're Korean. Well, I can tell they're Korean because I've been over there, and I know Japanese people don't look the same as Koreans do, and of course, most Chinese people don't look the same as Koreans or Japanese. You can tell the difference by looking. Culture can be used in a global context. Western culture refers to people clustered from the northern area of Europe. So what is Western culture? Does it have to do with McDonald's? Well, there's McDonald's all around the world, of course. I'm not sure where this is. So what is Western culture? Western culture is the United Kingdom. This is England right here. That's Wales. This is Scotland, and that's Northern Ireland. And that's all part of the United Kingdom. So it's English. I had my DNA checked, and 56% of my DNA was from England. I had some from Ireland. Not a whole lot, but I had some from Ireland. I didn't have any from the Netherlands, but the Netherlands is part of Western culture. Then the Dutch are crazy about the color orange for some reason. Well, I know why. Okay. A portion of my DNA was from France, and this is Paris, obviously. There's the Eiffel Tower. That's Crèvecoeur. Crèvecoeur means the curve of the heart. Anyway, Sacré-Cœur. I'm sorry, that's Sacré-Cœur, Sacred Heart. It's on top of the hill. It's the highest point in Paris. Okay. Anyway, that's France. That's part of Western culture. Germany. Large part of my DNA was from Germany. And that's it. I had English, Western European, which is Germany and France, and then a little bit of Irish, and that was it. I didn't have anybody else. There was nothing else there. I didn't have any Northern European. I didn't have any Southern European. Didn't have any Eastern European. No American Indian. No African American or African. Nothing else. I was just the whitest person you can possibly imagine. I'm not bragging. I think it's a little strange that none of my ancestors became attracted to somebody who was not English or German or French or Irish. It just seems a little odd because I find I find people that look different from me exotic. It just seems a little strange that nobody ever married anybody else, and not in my ancestry anyway. Countries with a strong English heritage include the United States, Australia, and Canada. The Jewish culture, subcultures within other cultures, the Jewish culture, while 32% of the Jewish people in the world actually live in Israel, 36% live in the United States. So the majority of Jewish people in the world live in the United States, as interesting as that is. Urban cultures as compared to rural cultures. Some people like crowds. They feel afraid. I have a brother that we grew up on a farm, but when he went down to Georgia, he said he felt claustrophobic because of all the trees and they were so close together. Well, we grew up in on a farm with a woods. We had a woods in the back in back of our property, but he was still scared of trees. As stupid as that was, I thought it was a little strange. Gay and lesbian culture, also a subculture in the United States, around the world. High socioeconomic status culture. This is weird. I don't know if you've ever been around rich people before, but they feel like everybody wants their stuff. So they lock themselves in. They have these gated communities. Usually it's around a golf course or around a country club. It seems kind of silly to me to be that paranoid about people, thinking that everybody wants your stuff. But I'll tell you, they're different, and this is one of the reasons why I found people adhering to Donald Trump, to the former president Donald Trump, as strange, because these were not wealthy people. It wasn't just wealthy people that backed him. It was all of these individuals that had very little money. It just seemed a little strange. Anyway, I've been around these people most of my life. I've never been wealthy, but my daughter seems to marry. Oh, golly, that didn't sound right. All of her relationships have been with wealthy people. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. She seems to be attracted to money. She doesn't have any of her own. She lives on it. She doesn't. Nobody gives her money, but she's attracted to these people for some reason. She wasn't attracted to Trump as a president, however. Vegetarian culture, of course, is another subculture. You can see this guy is so strongly vegan that he tattooed his arm vegan to tell everybody what's going on. His shirt doesn't say. Operation is what it says on top, but none of these mean anything. Anyway, not important. Millennial culture is a subculture in the United States. Britney Spears, Toy Story. I'm not sure what this guy is. That's Will Smith, and Batman, of course. All the Batman movies came out while millennials were growing up, I guess. I have no idea what Britney Spears is doing with a snake. The harbor culture is a subculture in the United States as well. Mac user culture, Macs versus PC. I'm a Mac user myself. I'm not that enamored with it. It just seems easier to me to use a Mac. The Trekkie culture is a subculture in the United States. As weird as that is. I mean, these are some really interesting people. But there are some strange groups out there, I'll tell you. I'm not a Trekkie. You know, live long and prosper. That's what that symbol means. This guy's got oh, that's a hat. I was thinking that was a wig. Members of subcultures may not live near each other, but their members live in a shared context. They communicate with each other. They maintain norms that distinguish them from other groups and have some common practices and ideas. These guys are bronies. Bronies are My Little Pony adherents. As you can see, they dye their hair in the color of their favorite My Little Pony. I don't know anything about My Little Ponies, and I've never run into these people, not that I was aware of anyway, but I have seen people with some interesting hair, but they're bronies, as strange as that is. The QAnon, if you follow politics and you understand that there's a strange conspiracy theory that so many people are adhering to, QAnon is a subculture. And it's an anti-government subculture, as strange as that is. They have some very interesting ideas. They think that Democrats are pedophiles and Satan worshipers, in secret, of course, and that Donald Trump is going to save everyone from the baby-eating, blood-sucking Democrats, pedophilic Democrats, as weird as that is. And they really believe this. You never want to tangle with one of these people because they believe all of this stuff that they're told. They think, and it was supposed to happen last Friday, that Trump was going to be reinstated as president of the United States. Obviously, it didn't happen, or I haven't read about it anyway. If it did happen, I don't know about it. And I check the news out all the time. I'm a kind of a news junkie. If I fall behind in your grading, you'll know that it's because I'm stuck on CNN and I can't get off. Each person has their own unique history of individual experiences that has shaped their views. I was in the military for 12 years. I was in the Air Force for 12 years. I worked in hospitals for 30 years. All that has shaped my experiences. All of these individual differences lead some people to reflexively embrace certain cultural messages, staunchly react to other cultural messages, and largely ignore some other cultural messages. And of course, that would be one of the things about the QAnon conspiracy, that strange subculture. These people ignore all the things that people are telling them. They know that all this stuff is secret, you know. The Democrats are blood-sucking pedophiles and whatnot. Now I'm going to tell you about a group called the Sambia. This is a little grotesque, but it's a good example of how cultures can be different. It's very extreme, and it's also sexual. So I don't really apologize for this, because I need you to understand that some people are very, very different from you, and they have very, very different cultures. So we're going to talk about the Sambia, okay? The Sambia are a tribe in Papua New Guinea, and this is Papua New Guinea, as you can see. It's just north of Australia. Because of the constant warfare around them, they have culturally ingrained initiation for boys to transform them into men. They have to make them into warriors so that they can protect themselves. And this is actually a picture of the Sambia. These are warriors of the Sambia tribe. The Sambia believe that femaleness is an innate natural essence. In other words, that we're born as everyone is born as a female, no matter what their plumbing looks like. Everybody is born as a female, and you have to cultivate maleness. You need to make them into warriors, and there's a specific way that you do that. Boys are seen as existing in a female world and are contaminated by their mother's womb. It is very important to rid boys of feminine habits and transform them into brave men in order to protect their tribe. So they feel that women have contaminated all the little boys. So in order to make them into warriors, they have to do specific things. Initiation practices are used to transform boys into men. They pierce the septum of their nose, as we saw back here. The septum of their noses has been pierced, and that's why they're able to carry these large bones in their noses. They thrash the boys with sticks to make them tough. Initiation also includes older men giving jurungdu to boys, achieved through boys performing oral sex on the men. Semen is seen as physical basis of jurungdu. Males are seen as incapable of producing semen without the initiation. In other words, unless they are initiated in this way, they will never be able to reproduce. So in order for them to produce semen that is reproductive, these individuals have to go through this ritual where they perform oral sex on the older men. Throughout one's life, a male engages in ingestion of semen from around ages 7 to 15. Receiving fellatio or oral sex to impart semen at 15, heterosexual contact with his wife after the age of 17, and some homosexual contact still. Sambian males thus go through homosexual, bisexual, and heterosexual phases throughout their lives. Sexuality, seen as a core identity in Western cultures, is more dynamic in Sambian culture. Sex is so important to them that is the way that they have protected their tribe, by creating men that can go out and defend the tribe. I know this is a little grotesque. There's a tribe that is very close to the Sambia in geography, of course, who believe exactly the same thing that the Sambia do, but instead of oral sex, these men have anal sex with these individuals. They have to give them semen in order to make them men. In all cultures, people speak a language between 10 and 70 phonemes, and of course, and I've asked people how many phonemes there were in the Dene language, and no one seems to have counted. There's about 46 phonemes in English. In all cultures, people smile when they are happy. In all cultures, everybody smiles. In all cultures, people have a word for the color black. In all cultures, people are disgusted at the idea of incest between parents and children, except this is in England, of course. This mom wants to marry her son and have his baby. As weird as that is. In all cultures, people understand the number 2. Some languages do not have a word for the color blue. People in some cultures are disgusted at the idea of incest between cousins, whereas people in other cultures are not. This is really kind of interesting because when they were writing laws in the United States, one of the laws that they wrote that had to do with marriage had to do with polygamy. You could only marry one person, and of course, some of the Indian tribes had a difficult time with that because because select men had more than one wife. They practiced polygamy. As a matter of fact, Quanah Parker, the last Comanche war chief, had 4 wives, and they kept trying. he kept trying to. They kept trying to tell him, you can't have 4 wives, and he kept telling them, okay, so you tell the women that they can't be my wife anymore, and see what happens. And he maintained 4 wives all his life, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, what else are we talking about? We're talking about, cousins, marrying your cousins. So one of the problems they had in stabilizing these laws was that in the South, you can marry your cousin. You can marry your first cousin. In the North, you can't. So the state, and of course, it's the states that pass their own laws. So it was really kind of interesting that in the South, you can marry your cousin, which you share 1/4 of their DNA with. Yeah, you share 1/4 of their DNA, and in the North you can't. You can marry your second cousin in the North, but you can't marry your first cousin. As interesting as, and there's an argument about what first and second cousin means. It all has to do with understanding what's going on. Sorry, I needed a drink. A female student going out for a coffee might mean for the student a chance to quench her thirst, of course, a demonstration that she has quit her diet, an effort to wake herself up so that she can study, an opportunity to pursue a romantic partner. All of these things may happen just because you go out for coffee. In some other cultural contexts, women going to a coffee shop on her own, it's not seen as appropriate that she goes by herself. People in her culture do not strive for ideal body weights. It is considered sinful to seek artificial stimulants to obtain energy. There are lots of, there are several religions that you can't drink stimulants. The Mormons don't drink coffee or any caffeine. Romantic relationships are typically arranged by family and members. So if this lady were from a Muslim culture, then it would be very inappropriate for her to go to the coffee shop, unaccompanied, certainly. Small mammals and birds that depend on spatial memory for food storage have unusually large volumes in their hippocampi relative to other species. The longer a London cab driver has been driving a cab, the larger his posterior hippocampus becomes. In other words, we're talking about your experiences. One of the things you may not know about the London cab drivers, in order to get a license to drive a cab in London, you can't just become a cab driver. You have to memorize all the roads. Now, if you think of London, living in the United States, driving around Phoenix or Tucson or Flagstaff, everything is relatively square because they built them. They built them over time, of course, but they're all relatively new. So that when they built the roads, they're all relatively square. So you can go around the block if you want to. In England, you can't do that because the England started as a small village and then it grew in concentric circles. So a lot of times roads will change their name, you know, in 5 or 6 miles, they'll change its name 3 or 4 times. So driving around England is really, or London is really very difficult. And what they make these guys do is memorize the map of London so that they can go to a select place as rapidly as possible. They don't want to rip off their clientele. So in order to get a license, they have to memorize the geography of the city, and they have to know all of these things. It's one of the reasons why, if you watch any Britcoms, any British television shows, they're talking about neighborhoods. They're talking about Crowell or Fulham or whatever. They're talking about a lot of neighborhoods, and the reason is because these neighborhoods developed in concentric circle structures. So it's really difficult to get around London. You can walk around and stay lost in London because you never know what the name of anything is. You know, if you go to Main Street in the United States, you know it's the street in the middle of town, but in England they don't have Main Street, or in London there is no Main Street. Anyway, there you go. And the point is that experience creates all of these things. So the more experience you have, the larger your hippocampi, the more memory that you have. I mean, not everybody can go on to Jeopardy and win $2 million, but there are a couple people that have because their memory, their experiences were that great. They were big readers. The nature of the brain is not fixed from birth, but rather changes in the response to certain experiences. And because cultures provide people with particular sets of experiences on a daily basis, we can see how cultural influences could change their brain. Although people around the world are born with relatively the same brains, with time they come to have different brains by the way of their different cultural experiences. So your experiences are totally different than mine. I didn't grow up going to sweats. I didn't grow up going to any ceremonies whatsoever. My family didn't go to church. So my experiences are completely different from yours. My brain is different from yours. I grew up on a farm, and we had those experiences. We didn't have horses. I don't remember anybody having horses. But everybody had a tractor, and I already talked about being enamored with old tractors. I've got one out in the garage or out in my barn right now. When we moved here, one of the things that I wanted secretly, not telling my wife, was a barn. I wanted a barn. I wanted a nice barn because I grew up in a barn. I wasn't born in the barn, but I grew up playing in the barn and playing in the haymow and, you know, all of these things. Anyway, that's my cultural experiences, and it may be totally different from yours. Driving around the reservation, I don't see a whole lot of barns that look like the barns that we have in Iowa. Now I'm in Iowa. Most of the barns in Indiana have fallen down because the small family farms, they don't have them anymore. So they just let them go. I live in an old farmhouse. This farmhouse was built in 1918. So it's over 100 years old. So these are a lot of different experiences. I just went outside. I'm trying to grow an orchard because I like apples. I like the idea of apples. I'm not sure how many of them I will eat, but I like the idea of apples. So I live in an apple orchard, or I want to anyway. Lots of apple trees around. They're all different. So it's going to be interesting. My wife is kind of tolerating my desire to have an orchard. I started planting apple trees, and she started planting other trees. So I can't go. She kind of blocked me from putting. We've got 4 acres. We've only got 4 acres, so it's not like there's trees all over the place. Oak trees and maple trees and whatnot. So she kind of blocked me from going anywhere else, from putting trees in too many places. It's kind of interesting. She was military, so they didn't really live any place permanent until she was in high school. They moved all around the world actually, uh, and so she doesn't have the same experiences that I have, or the same desires. Like I said, I have a tractor out in the barn that doesn't work. Uh, and I know nothing about fixing tractors or anything. I wish I did. It's an old tractor too. Humans are so embedded. It has run in the past. I don't want you to think I have a tractor that doesn't go anywhere. It's not moving right now, but if I can get somebody out here to fix it, I guess I will. Anyway, humans are so embedded in their cultural worlds that they are always behaving as cultural actors, and their thoughts are always sustained by the meanings that are derived by their cultures. There are no occasions when people step outside of their cultural meaning systems and start to think instead like the universal human. This doesn't happen. There are no universal people. We all grow up in a select culture, even if it's a diversified culture, or if we grow up in a city where there are a lot of people with a lot of different cultures. This is one of the ways that the American culture has come to be. There are a lot of people from Germany, from England, from Ireland, from Italy. um, all these people came over from Europe, and they kind of amalgamated their customs. And this is one of the reasons why, if you go to Germany or to England, you won't find Santa Claus. They don't have Santa Claus. You know, Santa Claus is all over the United States. He's all over Canada. But in England, they have Father Christmas. In Germany, they have St. Nicholas, and it's not the same. They don't look the same. They don't act the same. So how in the world did we uh, become accustomed to putting up Christmas trees and having Santa Claus visit? It was an amalgamation of different ideas from England and from Germany. The Germans had Christmas trees. The English had Father Christmas that came on Christmas Eve, and this somehow evolved to be Santa Claus and Christmas trees. Um, the Germans do have Christmas trees, but the English don't always. They do. They have borrowed some of our customs, and so now they have Christmas trees. Some people do anyway. People's thoughts are forever bound in their own cultural meaning system, and we can't get out of it. So mine is, Hoosier farm boy. I'm from Indiana, so I'm a Hoosier. So even if I live in Iowa for the rest of my life, I will still think in the way of somebody from Indiana. One of the interesting things about the difference between farmland in Indiana and the farmland in Iowa, people own 1,000 acres here, and in Indiana, if you owned, 200 or 300 acres, that was a lot. So the farms are smaller in Indiana. The equipment here is just massive. It's so big it barely fits on the road. If somebody is moving their combine in Iowa, you got to get out of their way because the roads aren't big enough to hold them. Even the tractors are too big. They have to run on the side of the road, which would be okay, except the ditches here are relatively deep. We've got one out in front of our house that must be 4 or 5 feet deep. And you can't just run off into the ditch. In Indiana, the ditches aren't that deep, so you could actually run in the ditch, but not here. You can't do that here. So the roads here have to be a little bit wider. Many cultural psychologists would argue that culture cannot be separated from the mind because culture and the mind make each other up, and this is something that is fairly positive. If a cognitive tool does not exist in all cultures, it reflects an absence of universality and is said to be non-universal. So the skateboard, for example, would be non-universal. I'm not sure what else there is. An existential universal exists in multiple cultures, although the phenomenon is not necessarily used to solve the same problem, nor is it equally accessible across cultures. And this shows high school sweethearts and how they dated in the 50s, how things changed in the 1970s, and how things have changed in the 1990s. In the 1950s, nothing to worry about. Let's get married first before we have sex. In the 1970s, things were a little different. People were smoking a lot of dope. And this guy says, let's get stoned first. And in the 1990s, of course, the AIDS epidemic hit in about 82, 83. And by the 1990s, people were worried about contracting AIDS. So it's the same process. They're all three thinking about having sex, but it's an existential universal. They all are teenage sweethearts that want to have sex. But of course, everything else is different. A functional universal exists in multiple cultures, is used to solve the same problems across cultures, yet are more accessible to people from one culture than another. If you live in a really cold place, then this hat is something that you want. I grew up wearing a hat like this in Indiana. It's not that cold, but that was the hat that everybody wore back then. When I was in Montana, this is a very popular hat in Montana. I didn't see a whole lot of them down in Saline, but Ching wears one, which is kind of interesting. But then again, he's from someplace really warm, and he needs to keep his head warm. Anyway, functional universal. An accessibility universal exists in all cultures, is used to solve the same problem across cultures, and is accessible in the same degree across cultures. This is a fancy Chinese bathroom, and it has everything that you need. It's really kind of interesting. We try to cover the shower, but they don't. After you take your shower and you splash your water wherever you splash your water, and then you wipe everything down. That's the way you're supposed to do it in China. So there's no shower curtain. This is a bidet. That's for washing your body parts if you have urinated or if you've defecated. You defecate and urinate in here, and then you wash yourself off with this thing. Instead of using toilet paper, as you can see, there is no toilet paper. So they use the bidet. And this is a handle. There's a handle over here as well. So you can get up off the toilet. And this helps you get up off the bidet. But this is a shower. And that's the way bathrooms look in China. Not all of them, of course. This is a fairly upscale bathroom. But the Chinese don't... didn't sound right, did it? If they take a shower, they use the water to clean the bathroom. The vast majority of psychological studies have thus far been largely limited to explorations of the minds of people living in Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. and they have created this acronym WEIRD. That's somebody from the West who's educated, lives in an industrialized country, they're fairly rich, and they consider themselves democratic. A recent analysis of the top 6 journals and 6 subdisciplines of psychology found that 68% were American, 96% came from Western industrialized countries, 70% of all psychology study participants are undergraduate students. North Americans appear to be more fascinated with psychological questions than those from much of the rest of the world. Many universities not in North America don't even offer psychology as a topic of study. The first school of psychology in Japanese universities was established in 2000. And here, of course, we've had psychology departments around the United States for almost 100 years. Psychology departments, because they weren't really doing a lot of research in psychology, started out in philosophy departments. So if you go to the Indiana University and go into their library, each discipline has their own floor in the library, and psychology is not, there is no psychology or social science floor. Psychology is on the philosophy floor. So I have a doctorate. My doctorate is, I have a PhD. The PH stands for philosophy. I'm a doctor of philosophy, and the discipline that I philosophize is psychology. So I have a PhD. It's interesting because Professor Barber is getting his doctorate, and his doctorate is not the same as mine. Mine's a PhD. His is going to be a Psych D, psychology doctorate, and it's more for individuals who do counseling. Psych D. Kind of curious. There's also EDDs. EDDs are doctor of education. Doctor of education is a 3-year degree as compared to a PhD, which is a 4-year degree, or a Psych D, which is a 4-year degree as well. And these are different organizations. As you can see, philosophy and psychology are in the same department. Here, science and at Texas Christian University, it's in the science and engineering section. And anyway, and at Harvard, it's in the philosophy section. Some people in the diversity movement maintain a colorblind or culture-blind approach to looking at people, assuming that everybody is exactly the same, which is a nice way to see things, but it doesn't give people the opportunity to be who they are. You just assume that everybody's the same, so you want everybody to be like you. And of course, one of the things that they say is people are the same wherever you go. Well, kinda, but no, not really. The hope is that people will interact without focusing on someone's ethnic background, and they refer to this as being post-race. Attending to and respecting group differences is frequently called multicultural approach. The rationale behind this approach is that people really do identify with their groups, and most group identities are far more meaningful than the kind that can be artificially created in the lab. So the reality is you guys are Dene, and it's very important for you to be Dene. You don't want to be, it's a small world after all. You don't want to sing that song and everybody act the same. You want to be your own selves and have your own traditions and whatnot. And that's more of a multicultural approach, recognizing the fact that other cultures exist and we need to respect them. People are especially likely to identify with their groups if their groups are smaller than other groups or are disadvantaged in some way. Minority groups tend to greatly value their group identities, and they often respond quite negatively to efforts by the majority group members to ignore what makes them distinctive. And of course, that is incorrect. Efforts to downplay group differences may come across as suggesting that minority members would be accepted as long as they shed their distinctive cultural identities and act like those in the majority group. And that's what was happening with with the boarding school movement in the United States. It evolved out of something else that was happening. There was a possibility of genocide. If you read the congressional, every year the Congress would get a reading on what was going on in the War Department with the American Indians. And every year they said they're declining rapidly. If we are not careful, then they will disappear. And so the probability of genocide, not just because of combat, but also because of biological problems, immunity problems, was very real. And it looked like American Indians might disappear. As a matter of fact, at different junctures, if you read these things, you realize that they were scared that American Indians would go away and they wouldn't be there anymore. And they didn't want that to happen. The federal government didn't want that to happen. So they tried to figure out a way to support American Indians. And one of the ways they came up with, well, we need to Christianize them. We need to integrate them into American society, which they, of course, didn't have a clue what American society was all about. So one of the things they did, they started the boarding schools to save. The idea was that they were trying to save the American Indians. That was the idea anyway. And the other way was to Christianize them. And of course, that had to do with boarding schools as well. Now, I'm not saying that this was correct. What I'm saying is their intentions were not negative. They weren't trying to destroy the Navajo people. They weren't trying to destroy the Sioux. What they were trying to do was to incorporate them, to amalgamate them, to assimilate these individuals into the American society. And they saw that as the only way that they could save the American Indian. And of course, looking back, we can see that it was probably a mistake, and things didn't work out the way that they thought that they would. At the same time, they were educating a lot of immigrants coming into the United States. And the idea was, you know how stupid people are, they can only come up with one idea. So they figured if they did the same thing with the American Indian, they would be able to, what they're trying to do, they're trying to educate all these people to become Americans. And they were trying to do exactly the same thing with the American Indian. So you got to look at it from coming from two different directions. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying that's what happened. So the idea was that they were thinking that they were saving people. They thought they were anyway. And as it turned out, it was fairly destructive to a lot of Indian cultures. The Dene culture has been able to maintain itself, but not all cultures were as isolated as Navajos. Efforts to downplay group differences may come across as suggesting that minority members would be accepted. Okay, and this was the idea, and this is what they did with all the immigrants. Of course, there's a huge difference between people that already live here that you're trying to change, and people that are voluntarily coming into the country that you're trying to change. But of course, they treated everybody the same. The educational system was trying to create good Americans. They thought they were anyway. Studies done looking at corporations found that the more multicultural and less colorblind the attitudes of the white employees, the more the minority employees were engaged in their work. So multiculturalism is a good idea. Multiculturalism, accepting people for who they are and respecting their culture, makes them feel wanted or needed. What they discovered, pretending that somebody is the same as you are, makes them feel uncomfortable. It creates a cognitive dissonance, and that is not a good thing. In the same study, the researchers discovered that minority employees have more trust in and comfort with a company that offers multicultural messages rather than one that offers colorblind messages, especially when the company has only a few minority members. One of the problems with this colorblind idea is that it forces the individuals to start acting like everybody else. And potentially, of course, they have different ideas, different cultures, and they don't want to act like everybody else. And we're going to read about this later on. Individuals will have two ways of thinking of themselves. So when they're around their white friends, they act one way, but then when they're home, they speak their native language and they act in a totally different way. And this is not that easy to maintain. Ethnocentrism is judging people from other cultures by the standards of one's own culture. Our cultures ultimately socialize us to be ethnocentric because we are socialized to value normative cultural behaviors. And of course, these two people see each other as different. Well, they are different, but she thinks she's free, and she thinks she's free as well. In the 1950s, with the advance in brain imaging techniques, psychology entered the cognitive revolution as researchers rejected the tenets of Freud, Skinner, Watson, and Rogers, and began focusing on the meaning that people created through their encounters with the world. And of course, this is the cognitive revolution that occurred. So if you talk to some people who are cognitive psychologists, this has become almost a religion for them. They reject all these other people: Skinner, Freud, Watson, and Rogers. I was trained as a Rogerian. The psychology program that I was in initially was a Rogerian humanitarian humanism form of psychology. But one of the fathers of the cognitive revolution, Jerome Bruner, argued that the proponents of the cognitive revolution had become distracted from its initial vision by becoming more concerned with computer metaphors for understanding the functioning of the mind. This is really kind of interesting because I started studying psychology in the 70s, and at that point they were still locked in trying to compare the human mind with computers. Now, in the 1970s, computers were not nearly as complex as they are today, but it was really difficult for this mindset, this cognitive psychology mindset, to pull away from trying to think of the human brain as a mechanical structure. Really tough. So when I first started teaching in the 1990s, this mindset was still there. So when I first started talking about cognitive psychology, I kept having to compare the human brain with computers and how computers are put together like this, Meaning became replaced with information. Meaning making became replaced with information processing. And of course, you can talk about information processing if you're talking about your own brain, but the reality is you have analytic capabilities that computers don't have. You can change from one minute to the next, 1 second to the next. Bruner argued that cultural psychology has picked up the torch that was originally carried by early proponents of the cognitive revolution and has again addressed how people derive meaning from their environments. That is the end of the chapter. Really kind of interesting. I had an argument one time with a cognitive psychologist. I'm not a cognitive psychologist. As you know, I have a varied background, so I see things from a lot of different perspectives. And I had an argument about subliminal messaging. Fascinating. And this individual had read that subliminal messaging was bogus. It wasn't real, and that's what the cognitive psychologists were saying. But of course, you look at different research, and subliminal messages, some simple subliminal messages get through. I'd been working with subliminal messages since I was in the service back in the early 70s. So I knew that they did exist and that they really did work, but she couldn't find any. When she looked at subliminal messages, and we looked at different research, she rejected the ones that said that they did work, and she accepted only the ones that said they didn't, because that's what she was taught when she was an undergraduate. Anyway, okay, so cultural psychology has taken the torch of cognitive psychology. I guess that's what Bruner thinks anyway, and that's the end of the chapter. I will do these lectures every week. I hope I haven't offended anyone. I apologize. I think the Sambia are really important because we need to know that even the most bizarre thoughts can be part of people's cultures. It's I've lived all my life working in the morgue, and here you guys have a taboo about touching dead things, which that's what I've done. I've done autopsies, so it's your taboo against dead and touching dead things is totally alien to me. Not as alien as the Sambia, but and that's just an example. That's just an example. So this is cultural psychology. We'll talk about all of this stuff. I've lived in a lot of different places and experienced a lot of different cultures. If I talk about negative about any culture, like I just did about the Dene culture and your taboo against the dead, I don't mean disrespect. I'm not saying that your culture is bad and my culture is good. What I'm saying is that they're different, and that's what I'm trying to point out. So when I point out a difference between the Japanese culture and the American culture, I'm not saying the Japanese culture is wrong. I'm just trying to point out that their culture is different, and that's one of the things that we need to think about as we think about becoming counseling psychologists. Because the first thing that we need to do is we need to determine who this person is. And one of the best ways of doing that is by investigating their definition of culture. One of the other things that you need to remember is you can have an individual like my brother and I who grew up in exactly the same place at exactly the same time. And because our experiences were different, we interpret our cultures differently. I have a brother that's very conservative. I'm fairly liberal myself, and he's fairly conservative. So the question is, how in the world did you ever become a Trump lover growing up in the house that you grew up in? And the answer is that his experiences were completely different from mine. So what he saw and what he has experienced are completely different. He has different ways of looking at the world, and it's because not because we grew up differently, but because we experienced different things. He's my baby brother, so whereas I didn't get a bicycle until I was 12. He had the top of the line bicycle when he was 7 or 8. Why? Because he was the baby. My parents didn't have to worry about saving money for somebody coming along later. He was the last one. So different experiences. Okay. I'll talk to you guys again next week.